Hey, welcome everyone. So pleased that you're joining with us today. Want to say hi to Alison Colchester. You won the award for logging on first, well, at least according to my phone. Andy Stewart, what a hero. Andy, thank you for joining us too. Got Jan Bedford all the way from Ipswich watching. We've got Trev Frost too. So thank you guys for tuning in today. It's going to be a good one. I want to welcome Jonny. Jonny, you happy to show your face? Here he is. Hey, how you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, not so bad at all.
Jolly good, jolly good. Well, I think, hi, Brenda. I was getting a bit worried at one point, Brenda, that you weren't going to be joining us, but I'm so glad that you have done. Hi, Andrew. Yes, we've already done that bit. Now, this Unpacked Lunch always gives us the chance to be able to go back to Sunday's talk, to explore it a little bit more, to ask questions about it. You know, for those of you who are part of the Forge, you'll know that in a sense, our talks have been shortened from about half an hour or kind of 40 minutes if it was me, reducing down to about 12 to 15 minutes. And so these times just give an opportunity to explore just that little bit more. Jonny, you spoke on Sunday. I thought your talk was great. Really enjoyed it, and found some really helpful stuff in it too. Before we get onto that though, I think it's really important to just ask one or two questions. We're part of this Better Together series. And so Alex Laver had put together this kind of opening video, and you've got bacon and eggs and all of those kind of things. I just want to do just a very quick challenge for you. Okay, on you need to say which one do you prefer, or you know, this and that, the things which we associate together. You got to pick your favorite from the two.
Let's go.
Okay, so here we go then. So we're going to go sea or sand?
Sand.
Ant or deck?
Whoever the taller one is.
Ant.
Ant.
Okay, yeah. Domino's or Pizza Hut?
Take away Domino's, eat in Pizza Hut.
Wise. I like that. Yes, I love Pizza Hut.
Eating.
Yeah. Okay, football or rugby?
Play rugby, watch football.
Okay, yeah, all right then. Everton or Man United?
Everton. Oh yeah, Everton.
Really?
Yeah, you just feel sorry for him after a while.
Oh, get away. You are a big Liverpool fan, aren't you? So I just thought I'd bring up those two. Rihanna or Katy Perry?
Katy Perry.
Good choice. Yeah, I like that one. Rock or jazz?
Jazz.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, you're weirder than I thought. Okay, online or live?
Speaking live, watching online.
Okay, Amazon Prime or Netflix?
Prime.
Really?
Definitely. Oh, it's way more on Prime.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hot or cold?
Cold.
Thurston or I? Ah!
Debenham. That's the worst answer I can give. No, not doing it.
Not doing it. Okay, you chickened that one. Okay, all right then. Well, as you say, some things are better together, though, aren't they? Some things are better together. Yeah.
Better together, isn't it? So
absolutely, yeah. Okay, Jonny, you were speaking on the third part of this series called Better Together. So we'd looked at intimacy with God. We'd looked at community and the importance of community and having those key people in our lives. That's what we looked at last week. Yeah. And so this week it was more about how we have influence, or how we can have influence with people who are not necessarily part of church and life. So do you want to just talk us through your talk?
Cool. Yeah. So sharing a little bit around an experience I had initially of just not belonging, feeling out of place, just a really awkward situation where I was wearing completely the wrong thing to the poshest dinner or poshest lunch I've ever been to. I was sitting on this table literally with multi-billionaires who I was learning about at college, who I just sort of stumbled upon and happened to be sitting at the same table as, and having these conversations with whilst they were all in tuxedos and I was in like a neat jumper, which was way too big. Really fun time. I really enjoyed it. But we've all been in situations, haven't we, where we've just felt so out of place. And so shared a little bit of that story, but the reality is when we do feel out of place, when we don't feel like we belong, we just want to escape. And the worst possible experiences we can have is when we don't feel like we belong, or that we're not wanted, or we're pushed away, but we can't leave that situation. for many people, church can be that experience where they just don't feel like they belong, or they don't feel wanted. And actually, if there's an opportunity to move when they're in that situation, you can guarantee that it won't take long at all. In fact, I would hazard a guess that I'm sure there's statistics somewhere where people make up their mind about things in like the first 10 or 20 seconds. I think that's true with church as well. And so if you're not feeling warm, if you're not feeling welcome, you can guarantee that maybe you're listening right now, or you tuned in on Sunday and you're curious. You had exactly that experience, or you know someone who had that experience. Maybe you grew up in church and you decided to move away. And then when you did, nobody really felt like, you never really felt like anyone missed you. Another thing is, I sort of said on Sunday that churches never look to try and create that experience. What's odd is that churches often try and create the antithesis of that. They try and create the opposite. And so I know loads of church leaders who try and create warm experiences, and yet often that's just not the experience people have. And what's just so crazy is that is the opposite of what Jesus taught. And so whatever Jesus taught is obviously not how the church often responds and often acts, but is something that we should definitely be shooting for, definitely sharing. And so Jesus is on the hillside at Galilee, and these 5 completely different groups come towards him. And then he just uses this moment as this discipleship moment, and really famous group of passages called the Beatitudes, or the Sermon on the Mount, as it fits into. You can read them in the book of Matthew, and Jesus goes through and he says, "Oh, blessed are the poor in heart, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who mourn." Just blessings that you would never expect people to be blessed by. But you can imagine Jesus pointing these different people out and these groups out, and just sort of saying, regardless of whatever tribe you've put these people in, or regardless of whatever prejudice you've had against them, regardless of how you feel towards them or what you'd have expected of them, actually, I want to meet them in their greatest need. And that's where I want to sit. And so complete change from the diverse, separation you'd have had in all these different groups of people. Jesus brings them all together and stands with them in their greatest need. And so I ask the questions at the end: where is it that you sit, that you might think disqualifies you from coming to the table, coming to the mountainside where Jesus is? And who is it that you know that you might not expect to see in that place, but actually really needs to come and experience Jesus too? So that was Sunday's talk in small, bite-sized.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to come on to some of that, just to explore some of that in just a moment. I want to welcome Ben Goodwin. Thank you for watching, mate. Tim Sparks too. Kevin Keegan. He says, "Bang on with the pizza." So he obviously goes definitely with you on that one. He ought to be in your small group, really, doesn't he? Because that's right. Anyway, Ruth also says, "We all know it's Thurston," she says, and then she goes back to work. So she's off. So she just came in to say Thurston is best, and off she goes. That's right. Yeah. So Andrew is also logged on too. So welcome to Andrew too. Okay. Let's just pick up. You were talking about the context of Jesus giving this message, these Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount, and you said that he was speaking to his disciples with 5 groups of people. Do you want to just expand a little bit of who were these 5 and why were they so diverse?
Sure. So whenever we read the Bible or any historical text, you can't really fully appreciate it unless you recognize some of the complexities that are going on. I want you to imagine just for a second, if you try to describe Brexit to someone in 100 years' time, you would never be able to fully appreciate the landscape of what's been going on unless you can try and describe some of the complexity around where people stand and what people's thoughts were and what people were like. Just thinking even to the last general election we had, I can remember seeing an interview with a journalist with 5 different people who had different opinions on Brexit and different opinions on who they were going to vote for, depending on that. So you'd have some people who would have really clear views over how they'd want Brexit to happen. Some people who had sort of a different idea of what they wanted from Brexit. Somebody else who had a different opinion on who they would vote for because of those 2 different things. People who voted Brexit and voted Remain from Labour, and then from Conservative, and then Liberal Democrat. The complexity around how people think in areas of controversy do tend to create some form of grouping, and it's easy just to lump people together in one group and say, well, there's a crowd, let's leave it, and then try and tell an easy version of history. And that's kind of what we do with the Bible. When we hear a crowd comes to Jesus, we just think, well, there was a crowd and they were all the same and they all came to Jesus, and they were probably farming or doing their thing. We don't know anything else about their lives.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says what he says, and then everyone cheers, hooray, amen, end of the book. But that just isn't real, first of all, and it's not true. And so what we're looking at here is perhaps the most politically, religiously diverse group and perhaps divisive landscape in that world. It was under Roman occupation with massive religious divides all the way through, all based around the lake. Now, Israel, if you've been, you'll know it. It's about the same size as Wales. In fact, I think it's actually a little bit smaller. And so a really small land, a lot of that land's not used. And so you're really looking at a few different places where people congregate. And that's where all those different people congregate. And so Jesus is around the Sea of Galilee, and the Galilee all around it has these different groups. And so a couple of resources, if you're interested, I talk about it all the time because I think they're brilliant sessions that at the very least make you think. The Bema sessions from Marty Solomon give a great insight to the different kinds of religious Jewish people who were around at the time. He recommends a book by Dallas Willard, all around the Beatitudes, that flicked through in preparation for this message online, and you can find a little bit around this as well. But highlighted these 5 different groups that are mentioned in the book of Matthew just before the Beatitudes. And we read through that and we're just like, cool, different groups of people. But we got to understand these people were people with such diverse ideas. We had the people from Galilee initially, and the people from Galilee were religious people. They were the Pharisees that you might hear about, the people who tried to get it all right, all the time. The guys would often see debating with Jesus, and it would have been normal for them to go out and try and hear a teacher or a rabbi to find out how they should live. But then you have the people from the 10 towns or the Decapolis or the pagan cities from the other side of the Galilee. Now, the Galilee was only, you could walk around it in 2 or 3 days, so these guys weren't far away, but the absolute opposite of the religious Pharisees. So you can imagine these 2 groups of people approaching because they know that Jesus is going to be around, and they see each other and they're like, what are you doing here? Like, who could it possibly be, to bring these 2 groups together? But it gets weirder because you have the people from Jerusalem. Now, these would have been political priests from Jerusalem, maybe Sadducees, people who would have been drenched in corruption. Not particularly like incredibly wealthy people as well. So these people would have made the journey all the way up from Jerusalem to reach the Galilee. Then you'd have had people from further away, people from Judea, who would have hated the Galileans because they were, highbrow educated know-it-alls. They'd have hated the corruption from the people of Jerusalem, and they'd have hated the people from the 10 towns because they didn't get it either. So they would have made it. And then, as if it wasn't diverse enough, you have the people from the east of the Jordan, who I said, so we don't really fully know who these people are, but we do know that zealots were in that area. Now, zealots were like religious extremists set on bringing down the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, of whom the people in Jerusalem were fully engrossed in and fully together with. So these 5 people could not be more, groups of people could not be further away from one another, and yet all of them have something in common. All of them are curious around who Jesus is, and they're willing, at least from what we know, to put their differences aside for long enough to hear what this guy has to say.
Okay, I find that extraordinary that he can pull on such a wide group, such a wide and diverse group of people. Jonny, you said in your talk that that Jesus wanted, it was all about blessing. Blessed are those. So he was talking to his disciples. So he wasn't necessarily talking to the crowds, was he?
Yeah, and so there's a brilliant bit, and again, this was actually picked up in one of the Bema podcasts that we listened to. But there's a great bit, and it changed my image of this whole passage. This is probably a passage I've read through, goodness knows how many times. But there's a brilliant bit where the crowds sort of come to Jesus. They're all sort of on this hillside. I've been to the hillside where they reckon Jesus may have done this this message, or one of these messages, or some of these messages, and it's almost like a steep, not a steep descent, but like a slow descent all the way down to the lake where these crowds could gather. And then it just says, as the crowds gathered, Jesus called his disciples together. And taught them and spoke to them. And he talks through this passage called the Beatitudes, where he says, like, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed who hunger and thirst for righteousness, blessed are those who want mercy, because they'll be given mercy. And I love this moment that all these crowds are here, and as a disciple, you'd be standing there like, what on earth am I supposed to do? Like, what am I going to do to try and keep the peace here if if stuff starts breaking out or people start shouting over? Like, what am I supposed to do? But Jesus uses this exact moment to speak into that to his closest disciples. And so whether he's like speaking to the disciples and people are listening in, like maybe that's happening, maybe maybe he's teaching this to the whole deal, maybe he speaks this several times to different groups. But I love to think that Jesus just pulls in close his disciples and just gives them this amazing moment of teaching. And he says, like, those verses, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And they're things that we would never imagine experiencing blessings from. If someone dies in someone's family, you'd never go to those people who are mourning and be like, man, they're really blessed. Like, the things that we would normally see as a blessing is normally when we get the thing that we want. We normally get the thing we want, and when we receive it, we think, great, I'm now blessed because I have more than what I need, more than what would satisfy me. But in this moment to the disciples, that's like the reverse of what Jesus describes. Jesus wasn't blessing on the cases that he thought they had got right, but in actually the things that they lacked. Jesus didn't focus blessings on what they wanted, but on the things that they needed. And so I imagine that Jesus was there with his disciples, and he's pointing out these groups that maybe the disciples feared, or maybe the disciples just had no knowledge of, or groups that the disciples had heard things about, groups that the disciples had already made their minds up and decided to avoid, like maybe groups that they would once been part of, but had now sort of felt like they needed to reject. And Jesus was like pointing at them and sort of saying, you see those guys there, they have need. You see those guys who hunger and thirst for righteousness, just because it doesn't exist in their culture. Like, blessed are they. Like, blessed are those who are mourning. You see those zealots and one of their family members died at the hands of the Romans, like last week. And you see those guys and they're mourning their father because he was crucified in Jerusalem. Like, blessed are they. And blessed are they, and blessed are they, and blessed are those who give mercy. And it's like exactly the opposite of what we would expect. And I don't think this is an excuse that, Jesus was just saying, oh, do what you want and you're going to receive God's blessing. But Jesus didn't focus blessing on what they wanted, but on the things that they needed. And so this was, I think, Jesus showing that God was making the first move. God was approaching these people as these people had come to him. And it's almost like, I imagine the symbol of God not moving, but these people deciding to draw in a bit closer. God decided to make the first move, approaching them instead of focusing on their baggage, instead of focusing on the array of things that each of them knew each other had got wrong. He decided to focus on their need and invited them into a better direction, almost inviting them all into his direction, inviting them close by addressing what their need was.
Okay, and what do you understand as this term blessed? It's people would sometimes say, I feel blessed because something good has happened. Yeah. So obviously good things haven't happened if they're mourning and if they're poor in spirit. And so what do you see that word blessed meaning?
Sure. And so blessed, I think, is just kind of an old-fashioned term for blessed, if you want. And so I'm aware on Sunday that's how I read that passage, partly because of tradition, partly because that's how I've just always read it. But in new translations, you'd probably be better just to read it like, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those. And you might say, okay, so Jesus is making the first move here, and he's inviting them into something. How is that blessing? Because they're still mourning. The way I would describe it is, what would it look like if you knew someone who was a blessing to you? If someone's being a blessing to you, it would tend to suggest that you had a need, and that person filled that gap or looked to help. And I think that's what Jesus is doing here. He's going out, showing his disciples the needs of all these different types of people and saying, regardless of their tribe, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their belief system, I'm the one who's willing to fill the gap. I'm the one who's wanting to be the blessing or show the blessing that I, as God, wants to offer these people. I want to invite them into a better storyline. I want to invite them into a better way of life. I want to invite them into the way in which they were always supposed to live, without all of the corruption, without all the division, without all of the self-righteousness, without the spiritual poverty that these guys live in. I want to invite them into a storyline in which I can be part of and I can fill the gap.
Okay, that's good. Let me just welcome, so Anne Sargent, fab that you're watching. Simon Parker too, thank you for that. Who else have we got? We've got Claire. Hi Claire, really glad that you're joining us too. If any of you have questions, you know, that I'm asking some. Jonny and I have talked beforehand, in the sense we've come up with some questions, but if there was anything from Sunday's talk that you want to ask about, just put it into the chat here on Facebook Live, and I'd love to be able to read that out. Or if there's something which Jonny has said already that you're not sure about, then again, just drop that in the comments section, and so I can ask that. Jonny, it seems that Jesus, when he started this message, he was saying that the kingdom of heaven is open for the unexpected people, for those who would think that they don't qualify or they don't count. So he was, as you said, I think you used he extended an arm of inclusivity. Yeah, I think it's something like that. That was the phrase in which you used. Yeah. So what does it mean for us as churches to extend an arm of inclusivity? What does that look like? Is it just welcoming anyone no matter what? Is there, do you know what I mean? Yeah.
So I think it's proactive. And so at the start of the talk on Sunday, I mentioned around how I don't know a single church who doesn't want to be welcoming and doesn't want to be warm. I know hundreds of church leaders, and every single one of them would say that they want to be people who offer a warm experience that people can come into. And yet that's not people's experience. And I think the difference is subtle but significant. Often what we can do, if you're a Jesus follower, or if you could call yourself as part of the church, and I would include myself in all of that, what it's so easy to do is to be passive in that. It's to expect people to come in and experience the thing that you're experiencing, rather than being active, proactive, around reaching out and deliberately being someone who brings them in close and being the blessing in their place of need. So I asked 2 questions on Sunday. One was, where is it that you sit that you think is too distant from receiving the blessing God wants for you? So if you could put yourself sitting at the hillside and you're in a particular tribe where you would see yourself in a particular way, or if you think that you've lived a certain lifestyle, or if you, whatever that is, have done a certain thing, put a particular label on yourself, you might think, okay, well, that doesn't include me then. Like that, you know, I'm out. I can't reach. Like Jesus wants to come to you and point you out and say, in that place of need, that's the place in which I want to start something with you. And I think that's important, because when we can truly evaluate and critique where we're at, we're able to offer something that reflects that to others. If you are unable to see for yourself in the sense that Jesus wants something for you and wants to reach you in the place that you're in, you're able to reflect that to others. And if you don't, it's harder to do that for others, because you can't do it for yourself either. And so one would be that. The other one would be, who is it in your life who needs to be shown the blessing that Jesus wants to give to them? And that's a proactive question. Because as soon as you name that person or understand, hey, there is someone and I don't really speak to them, or maybe no one really speaks to them and they're not like me and they don't look like me or speak like me or act like me. When we recognize who that person is, that action that happens as a result of that, where we reach out, speak to that person, invite that person, make that person feel warm and welcome, becomes a proactive task. And so it highlights the reasons we excuse ourselves from being proactive. So for me, some of my most amazing, the most amazing friendships I have are ones that I wouldn't expect to have, or ones that I wouldn't have expected myself to have. And so when we launched the I Congregation 4 years ago, there was, I was working in a coffee shop for a day in the community to get to know people. There was a guy called Russell who's, I don't know how old he is, but I won't guess. But fairly, and he's just like, he's not someone who I'd have ever imagined being someone that close to. I mean, he was kind of exploring different spiritual practices, Buddhism and different thoughts at the time, but we kind of got chatting and speaking, and then we'd have times where we'd eat together at least once a week. And now I would consider him an incredibly close friend, but it took some time of both of us being proactive in getting to know each other. And that's how that warmth towards church and towards faith came about. It didn't happen by accident or just expecting him to feel the warmth in the environment I felt warm in. And so when we have that proactive view, that's really what changes things.
Great. Yeah, I think a few weeks back on one of the Fridays with Fenning, I talked about the Black Lives Matter, and just thinking that I've never seen myself as a racist, although as we were going through and looking at that whole issue, it was just the case that I hadn't been proactive in welcoming Black families. So of course we have some Black families who come, but I haven't taken that proactive, because it must be so hard with our congregation being so white that they must feel as if they stand out considerably. And yeah, I think that's what I'm learning. It's not about not being something, it's about being proactive in a response, and that's what makes the difference. Let me just find out, is there anyone else dropped a question in? Brenda Stannard says, I could listen to Steve all day. Oh, Brenda, you are lovely. But I could put Jonny in that category too. Oh, look at that. I could put Jonny in the category too. Learned so much from you both. Thank you. Brenda, you are a star. Eleanor, hey, welcome. Really, really great you're watching today too. Jonny, is there anything else that you just want to pick up on from Sunday that you feel is important for us to be considering as a result of what you shared?
I think it would be that mention of being proactive. In fact, actually, there was a comment on Sunday.
Oh, yeah, I've got it. Let me ask. This is someone called Shana. I think was from South Africa. I think, I'm not sure though. But anyway, this was her question or statement. She says, "I think so often we might feel too afraid to be picked out of the crowd and chosen." So as you were talking about, Jesus kind of pointed to different groups. Just like Moses was, despite his weaknesses, Matthew was chosen despite being despised by others. Yet our Father in his grace calls us by his name. I loved this message. Thank you. How do you respond to that thing that some people will feel afraid that actually Jesus might say, no, actually, you're one of the blessed people?
Sure. So one of the tensions, and I'm going to try and use a big word in its proper context, I'm bound to get it wrong. One of the juxtapositions.
Ooh, yes.
It's the first one that came to mind, of inclusion or of not belonging, is that I think to be included takes a certain level of vulnerability in standing out, which in of itself is uncomfortable. And so either way, you're going to have some level of discomfort. But one of the things I said at the right at the very end of the message on Sunday was that including people can be really uncomfortable because it forces you to think in ways that you haven't thought before, or pick things out. So you mentioned in your experience a few Fridays ago, but that's just one area of something that I think is a much bigger attitude that we can think of. that's an uncomfortable thing to try and reconcile with yourself and trying to include others, and can be uncomfortable almost to be picked out and chosen, because you're like, why is this person showing me this? And that's just magnified all the more when it comes to Jesus, because it's like, when we truly recognize who Jesus is, who is Jesus that he should come to me and welcome me? And that's a mind-boggling thing, and that's something that we should be wrestling with and thinking about and grateful for our whole lives. But as we become more aware of that, that allows us to share that same arm of inclusivity to others. So that's why I included the two different questions. Number one, actually, where is it that you're sitting that Jesus is pointing out? Because you're right, that can be uncomfortable, but the discomfort of any alternative can be way more. And so yeah, absolutely, can be uncomfortable to be picked out, can be uncomfortable to be shown love to, can be uncomfortable for Jesus to show up in the areas of your life that you feel like you're missing. But that's exactly where Jesus wants to meet you, because it's totally better, and it brings us together, and that's wraps up the series nicely.
It does. And I suppose also Jesus, you talk about it being uncomfortable, but Jesus says, disciples, if you live this out, you're going to be persecuted.
Right,
and,
yeah.
and he highlights that twice, doesn't he? That actually there's a we're going to face conflict in going for that inclusivity. Jonny, thank you. Thank you everyone for connecting in. I think I missed one person, Alan, all the way from Hopton. He's been watching, so welcome to you as well. Jonny, thanks for sharing this. We start a new series on Sunday, and it's going to be you speaking again. So I'm going to be asking you questions next week too. And so please do join us if you're able to. But Jonny, what's the new series going to be?
Cool. So new series called Money Talks. And whenever the word money is mentioned in church, people go like this. And they tense up and they think, oh, what are they going to talk about? Am I guilty of everything? Am I supposed to give money? This is not a series around us wanting your money. We talk about that enough. But this is a series all around what Jesus says about money. Jesus spoke about money more than he did around things like hell. So that kind of surprises me, but it's something that Jesus spoke a lot about, because the reality is money plays a massive part in all of our lives. And so what would it be like if your money talked to you? I can guarantee that for everybody listening to this right now and everybody listening on Sunday, you can think of a time, you can think of a purchase that you made, and it makes you go, oh my word, why did I spend my money on that? So if your money could talk, what would it say? And what would Jesus say about what your money says? Yeah, that's what we're going to be looking into. It's going to be a fun series. We've got some amazing stuff happening on Sunday outside of that as well. So really excited for everyone to see that. So yeah, 10:30 Sunday, Facebook, YouTube, Forge Online. It's going to be great.
Fantastic. Jonny, thanks very much. Thank you everyone for watching. Really, really value you joining. If you're watching this on catch up, thank you again. You can still put comments, you can still ask questions, and we'll be able to pick up on those next week. Or you can drop an email to Jonny, and he'll answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again shortly. Take care.